is your Roots Lab Digital Photo 1 and 2. This is the part 1 of your Roots Lab. So today we're going to learn how to take our tree image and we're going to put that cutout of the tree image onto our background. So remember, you went out and you shot pictures of trees, and then you also shot some interesting backgrounds and textures from your house or your things that reminded you of your family. So I chose these spruce trees here because they're beautiful, and also I took this picture on a hike with my family, and I like that there's more than one. I'm going to probably crop all 3 of those trees into my image, and then I'm going to use this embroidery here as my background because my grandmother used to do embroidery. So I have these 2 images, but they need to be the same size. So, but the first thing I want you to do is open this tree image here and just make sure your exposure is correct. Now, when you double click on an image and it's a NEF file, it's going to open up in something called Camera Raw. So say that you are in Bridge here and you find this image and you double click on it, and at first it's not going to open up into Photoshop. Well, this one did because it's already open. So let's close that and let's double click on this. So it's going to open up something called Camera Raw. And this is a really cool thing because you can make some adjustments here without corrupting the pixels of your image. So, and this is a histogram here that shows you your darks and your lights. So I would definitely mess around with this a little bit first before you put it into Photoshop. So just tweak it a bit, make sure it's correctly exposed. We're getting creative here, but we also still want to make sure we're taking good pictures and things look good. Now you'll see that these tabs are all in different places than down the center, and that's because I've already edited this image. So when I open this image up again in a different situation, those tabs are still going to be there. So then you're going to click Open Image and it's going to open up into Photoshop. Now anything you do in Photoshop to this image from here on out is going to corrupt those pixels. So it's always a good idea to edit a little bit in Camera Raw. So again, you want to make sure that we have a duplicate layer. This preserves our original image so that we're not changing that. And we always want to double check that we are assigning the color profile to Adobe RGB. Make sure it's going to be set there, but just double check. Don't worry about the filtering and sharp mask right now. Just make sure this is correctly exposed. Okay, and then this image here, I'm going to grab my background. I'm going to drop it into Photoshop. And if you drop it over the icon of Photoshop, it will open up its own tab. So that's what you want. You want it to be in its own tab. And you can mess with this image as well. If this is an image you got off the internet, or it's it's not an image you took that's a raw file, it's just going to open straight up into Photoshop. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that both of your images are the same size or relatively the same size. This makes this process a lot easier. So you go up to Image Size, and you want it to be 300 resolution, DPI, and then let's do 13 inches. The height would be 13 inches, and the width is going to adjust, so that's fine, let that adjust. But the size of paper we have with the printer, the biggest we can go is 13 inches on one side. So we're going to resize that. And you'll notice that it's going to change the size a bit. You can always zoom back in by hitting Command plus and see it big again. And then we're going to click on our background here. And if you want, you can duplicate this layer as well. And then go up to Image Size. And this is, I got this off the internet. This is not a photo I took. I would prefer you use a photo you took, but this is a demo. So let's pretend this is my grandma's embroidery. It's not, but let's pretend. So I'm going to change this to 300, and then I'm going to change this to 13. And that's going to readjust, and I'm going to click OK. And it zooms way in, but of course you can back it up by hitting Command negative sign. All right. So now let's make it about that size. I'm going to click back over to my tree, and I'm going to select the entire image. So a shortcut for selecting an entire image is Command A, and you'll see as we zoom in that the marching ants are around the entire image. And then Command C copies that entire image. I'm going to click back over to my embroidery, and I'm going to hit Command V, which is the shortcut for pasting those trees onto the top of my background. Now, you might be wondering, well, how do I get rid of this background now? I want this other background to show through. So this is the most important part of the lab. It's the meat of the lab. You're going to learn how to do this using the paintbrushes, and you're going to learn how to use all these tools up here. So the first thing we want to do is create a layer mask on our tree layer. So you're going to scroll down to this little icon here, which is the mask icon, and it says add a layer mask. You're going to click on that, and you'll notice a little white box with the brackets around it is linked to your photo. This is the layer mask. We can paint out the background using this layer mask. And the tool we're going to use to do that is the brush tool. Now the brush tool looks very similar to our quick selection tool. It is not the same thing. The quick selection tool has the marching ants around it, and the brush tool does not. So you want to be on the brush tool. When you click on this brush tool, you'll notice all of these things up here. This tells you you're on the brush tool. The symbol's up here. This is the size, the hardness, and also the tip of your brush. You're going to make selections based on what you need there. This is the mode the brush is in. So you can paint with a normal brush. You can have your brush dissolve the paint, and you can experiment with all of these other modes. For this purpose of just painting out a background, we're going to stay on normal, and then we're going to make sure when we're painting our background that it's at 100% opacity. We want this right now because we don't want any of this background to show. We want our embroidery to show through instead. And then this is flow up here. Don't worry about this yet. This is more important when you get into painterly brush strokes. Right now we're using the brush as a tool to erase the background of your tree image. Okay? The next thing you need to pay attention to are these two boxes here. These are your color palettes. You got to make sure that the one on the left that's in the front is black, and the one on the other one is white. So as you're painting a mask, remember this little trick that black conceals, which means it hides an image, and white reveals. So we want to conceal the background. So we want to make sure this black is in front. If for some reason it looks like this, and you're, well, how do I get the black over here? You just click on this again and it jumps forward. So now we know we're painting with a brush, and it's black, and the size depends on what you're doing, right? So we'll talk about that in a second. We probably want a little bit of a soft brush. We don't want it to be too hard edged. We want our mode to be normal. We want 100% opacity, and for now our flow is 100%. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in by hitting Command plus, and we're going to kind of scroll over to the corner here. Zoom out just a little bit more. So what you want to do, you want to look at this circle here. See the size of this circle? That's the size of your brush. If you want to make the brush bigger, you can hit the right bracket. This is the shortcut. And if you want to make the brush smaller, you could hit the left bracket. This is real handy when you're painting because you're always going to be changing the size of your brush as you get in and around things. So we're just going to try to erase the outer edge first. So we want our brush to be fairly large, goes faster, and then we want to make sure in our layer section that we're clicked on this little layer mask, the brackets are on this instead of that. If we had it clicked on this, guess what? We're painting black. We don't want that. We need to be clicked on the bracket. I'm sorry, on the layer mask, so that when we're painting, we're erasing, right? Black conceals. So I'm going to go around, and the reason we want it 100% opacified, which means we're 100% black right now. I want to show you what happens when we go down. If I'm at 30%, see how I can kind of see the trees through it? I'm not fully erasing it. We don't want that yet. So we want to be at 100%. And I'm going to go around and I'm going to get fairly close. Make sure I get all the little bits there, and you can start to see the embroidery through it. I'm not going to get too close to the edge of those branches yet because I'm going to do that later with detail work. So I'm going to go around and get all those little edges and corners. This is so quick. You're probably just like slapping yourself saying, why did she show this to me earlier when I was making all those tedious selections of the hair and whatnot? Well, those, that's the selection tool is very handy as well. So we just have to kind of learn all of these things. These tools are all going to come in handy. And the more ways you know how to do something in Photoshop, the better you're going to be at Photoshop. It's going to become more intuitive, I promise. You're going to start to understand the layers and the brushes and what you can do with all these things. All right, so just be careful. I know I want like these 4 spruce trees. These are called blue spruce. I know I want those. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out here. And at this point, you probably want to save, just in case. So save as, and then your last name, and then Roots Lab. Always save as a PSD so you can edit. I'm just going to put it on the desktop and I'm going to save it. Okay, so now you can kind of see it's sort of floating there and it's not really defined at all. We're going to work on that in a second. The next thing I want to do is I want to reposition this. Maybe it's in the wrong spot. But to move it, I need to do a couple things. I need to make sure I'm on the right layer, but I need to be clicked over to this instead of the layer mask. And then I need to change my tool because I'm not painting anymore. I want to move something. So I'm going to click on the Move tool, go back over here and grab it, and then I can move it anywhere I want. And this is also a good way to see, oh my goodness, I didn't erase that edge there because it was right on the end there. I didn't notice it. So if I move this down or reposition it where I want it, remember I'm kind of going for symmetry here, so I'm going to put it right in the middle, closer to the bottom, drop it into place. And then if I want to get rid of that edge, guess what? I can't just go in and paint it. I have to make sure that my settings are correct. So I'm going to go back to the layer mask, and then I'm going to say I want my paintbrush back, and I'm going to go in and erase that. Okay, so now for the detail work. I'm going to zoom in again. And see all this negative space? That's what I want to paint out. And that's what the tedious part of this lab is going to be. You're going to have to do this slowly. So guess what? My paintbrush is huge. I can't very well paint in between all these branches with this massive brush. So I'm going to bracket it on the bracket left, shortcut, and you can change it. Okay, so maybe I'm going to make it about that big, and I'm going to go in a little tighter around the branches. Again, I am at normal mode and 100% opacified. I'm on my black brush. I'm on my layer mask. Those are all things you want to pay attention to. If you find you're trying to work and it's like not working the way you want it to do, you got to go back and check that you're clicked on the right layer and that you have the right tool selected. So now I'm going to go in tighter, making sure I get all those little bits. Go around tighter. Just kind of clean it up. Okay, I'm not going to do the whole thing for this lab, but just pretend like I did. Maybe we'll go around the right side of this so you can see what it's going to start to look like. And then it's going to get tricky because I want this nice little spruce tree to be in my tree as well. So look how neat that looks to have these giant embroidery stitches behind these delicate little trees. You're going to start to enjoy the way your image looks. It's gonna become very unique to you and your choices. Okay, so now I need to zoom in even more, and this is where it gets tedious. Okay, I'm gonna make my brush smaller by bracketing to the left, and now I'm gonna change things up here. Okay, still on a soft brush. I'm gonna make it smaller. You can change the size up here too. And my mode's still going to be normal. You don't really want to use the dissolve mode because see how it pixelates it? Unless you're going for that funky look, I would avoid that. Normal. But the thing you're going to change is you're going to drop the opacity down. Now this way, if you do this, then your edge becomes softer. And you can kind of get in there and erase without losing the tree. Just get in there right to the edge. And as you back up, it's going to become this soft edge. You can bump it up if you feel like it's not enough, or that you went right up against the edge there with your softer opacity, and then you want to go back and just erase a little bit more of that background. So like I said, this is the tedious part. This is the part that's going to take you some time, especially if you have a tree with a lot of little twigs. You know, you might want to think about that before you start working on this. And that soft edge is fine. You know, I'm not going to ding you for that. I think it's kind of a sort of a pretty transparency because I can see a little bit of the background in there. But you're going to mess around with the size, and you're going to mess around with the opacity. And you're going to just kind of continue to go around and around. Zoom out once in a while, take a look at it, see what it looks like. Looking pretty neat. And then later on in the lab, this is just part one. The objective for part one is to get the tree cut out and onto your background. Okay, and then part two, we're going to start thinking about your family tree and the placement of all the faces and any other elements you want to add to it, text, all that stuff. So it's going to get more complicated, but this is just step one. So the next and last important thing for this part one of this lab is to save it as a PSD again. We do not want to compress it by saving it as a JPEG yet because we want to keep working on it. Okay, so make sure that it's labeled your last name, Roots Lab, save it to the desktop, and then put it in your drive as a PSD, save, and if it's the same thing you already saved, you just hit replace. Okay, so that would be the completion of this particular lab. In the next lab, we're going to learn how to move some of the limbs around if you want to creatively change the form of your tree. And we're going to learn how to use the cloning stamp and some other selection tools to help you move things around and fuse things together. So start thinking about your family tree. Start thinking about taking notes on who's in the tree. Who are you going to represent in this artwork? What is the structure of your image? How do the faces and the names match up with the tree you chose and the limbs? How do they interact with the background? Think about color schemes. All of these things are creative choices that are going to make your artwork in the end unique to you and beautiful in your eyes. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this lab. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and I will either demonstrate to the whole class or I will demonstrate to you individually. I'd be happy to do that. All right, signing off.